Thank you, Bingjie and Hui, for joining us. You should know that you are the first guest for a very special reason on this interview series that we're doing around fraud and AI. I want to say that the two of you are my fraud besties, but that would be a huge disservice to you. We've worked together for almost 2 decades in the fraud world. You are two of the most knowledgeable people in fraud with the most hands-on experience and the most spectacular career that I've got to witness from day zero. And so really want to start on that note. Would love to start a little bit with your origin stories. We've been in the trenches together over some massive innovation and evolution in the fraud industry. We've got to have front row seats almost. The industry is filled with amazing fraud leaders across vendors, fintech, financial services, crypto. We've had the good fortune of working with a lot of these. So I want to start on that note. Nobody goes to college dreaming about entering the fraud industry, right? We're all sort of accidental fraud fighters, each with our own story on how we got into it. Bingjie, maybe we can start with you. Talk to me a little bit about sort of what your background is and how you fell into fraud to begin with. And then we can kind of talk about how we intersected later.
Sure. Thank you. It's an honor to be here today, RC, and also appreciate all the kind words and the feelings are mutual. I felt the same way. I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to work with you and Hui and many others throughout the entire PayPal journey. My background was statistics economics. Actually, I dream about using data to solve the real world problem and doing the right thing for the good people. In my early career, I started in the credit card industry, then attracted to tech and joined eBay Trust and Safety. So that's probably my early days start to get closer to the fraud space. eBay's fundamental was like people are basically good, but yet in the fraud space, we see with fraudsters are trying to doing damage to the system and whatsoever. So I felt like that was a great combination of my passion of data and science and using data and science to safeguard the platform and to build the trust for the business, for the customers, as well as drive a sustainable growth for the company. So that's where my passion started. Of course, PayPal take it to the next level for me because back in eBay, I was still like trust safety was a broader space I was working on. And PayPal is where like me to be laser focused in the fraud space indeed drive my passion to the next level, which I'm still very appreciative.
Amazing. Hui, can I ask you to do the same?
Thank you. And again, it's an honor to be here. And the two of you are my favorite ladies over however long my career. So I guess realizing we are more similar than different, like Bingjie. A lot of similarities with Bingjie's story, but I was also, I think, a data person. Like again, I had a degree from in also statistics. I got in fraud world. I would think it's like a coincidentally. So my first job was with FICO. I was in their research department researching credit scoring algorithm. I was young, out of school. She had not been even in the country a lot, so knew very little about the business world. There's a reason I have to mention that. But anyway, and then it was this time like my mail got stolen, and together went my ATM card. It was the first time for me. I was like, wow, what is this, right? And then of course the fraudulent charge came in and so on and so forth. And then I went and asked my manager, hey, Apple has been doing credit scoring for however long, 30, 50 years. Do we have a fraud solution? And I was told there is this other company in Southern California that specialized in fraud detection. And I can be wondering, like, what is it so different in fraud detection that a modeling company like FICO, who has been doing credit scoring for so long, actually said, oh, there is this other expert out there. So certainly come with a lot of expertise and knowledge, things like that. So that stays with me. And then when the PayPal opportunity presents itself, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go in and find out. So it's really motivated by a lot of curiosity. And of course, then the rest is all history.
That sounds amazing. So I'll maybe share likewise a very brief story of how I got into it. Mine was truly purely accidental. We all have a personal fraud story, I think, which I'd love to kind of hear about over the course of this conversation. But really, my fraud journey started from Australia, where I went to school and spent a lot of years. And it was a job on the fraud ops team when I was in college. So I've spent a lot of time truly in the fraud trenches, talking to customers, reviewing fraud cases, making decisions on them. I think from that point on, every role within the fraud world, from everything from workforce management of operations teams to rule writing, to obviously when we met doing product to technology and everything in between. And it's been a tremendous journey. But for me, I think along the way, I realized, and I'm sure you will agree, the fraud industry is very unique. There is no question of ever getting bored. Every day is a new day. Every day is a new challenge. Every fraud ring is a sort of a little mystery to solve. That really appealed to my nature. How we obviously intersected was literally 2 decades ago when we were all at PayPal. This was still early days. We'll talk about this a little bit. Machine learning had just become cool. I remember both Bingjie and Hui working on releasing one of the early credit card models, rebuilding the entire risk infrastructure while PayPal was going through massive growth. It's sort of like changing the engine when the train is fast moving. But I think just to kind of wrap up how we think about fraud careers, nothing is linear, right? Everyone falls into this from a different perspective, some from a statistic lens, some from a business lens, some from a technology lens. Eventually, understanding all of those nuances and learning how to use all those levers is sort of what makes for successful careers. You've both been amazing leaders. Hui, you were literally the number one when it comes to innovation in machine learning and how you can really use it at scale. Bingjie, nobody better than you to think about how to balance that journey between trust and friction. Would love to talk about sort of some unique challenges in how we're viewing sort of the fraud world, but maybe to kind of transition us to talking about trends as we see it, right? You both have spent a lot of time in payments, in fintech, in financial services. Would love to talk about what maybe the unique nuances are in detecting first-party fraud, so different than second and third-party fraud that you've spent a lifetime managing, and also maybe spend some time thinking about how much of first-party fraud is truly organized across industries versus opportunistic, which makes it even harder to detect and manage.
So let's talk about first party and the nuance as it pertains to how it's different from third party abuse. Generally, when we think about or talk about third party fraud, we are looking for a thief. In first party, you're typically looking at customers with significant history, real profiles, real SSNs, and we've seen second and third party fraud being a huge area of concern in fintech and financial services. So I guess my first question is, over the last several years, have you seen this mix change more towards first party? Maybe Hui, we'll start with you.
So definitely, over the last few years, we see actually a huge increase in first-party fraud, quote unquote fraud or abuse. Actually, in the early days, again, Bingjie and Arthur can attest to, right? So friendly fraud or first-party abuse used to be just some kind of almost like a leakage. Like we saw it every once in a while, and businesses just quote unquote pay for it as a business cost. But over the last few years, things have certainly changed. A lot more kind of organized first-party abuse. And of course, we all probably know why. It's because that now there is almost like an open source community out there. They are like all these bad guys teaching each other how to do this abuse. And they are actually very active in looking for ways to abuse various systems, right? So yeah, I definitely see it on the rise to a degree that it could actually seriously erode any company's margin, honestly, right? It becomes a serious issue. And then with that, of course, as a PayPal or as any fintech company, we have to build kind of end-to-end, like a good system to detect. Luckily, again, with all the foundational data assets we built over the years with the intelligence, a lot of them can carry over to this new domain, and which again we are able to build defense against. But we also say like there are a lot of similarity between first-party abuse and fraud detection, but they're also different, right? So when in risk management, we talk about identity, we talk about intent, and then we talk about maybe your capacity to pay. That's more like a credit domain. In a first-party abuse domain, identity looks clean. If you look at one transaction by itself, there is nothing wrong, which makes this problem so difficult. Again, in the third-party fraud, in this case, it looks so easy, right?
Yeah.
So we have to look a lot more from a contextual point of view, from the history point of view, from the network point of view, in order for us to detect, you know what, there is actually an organized ring. I was saying like it's like you have to find this fourth dimension in a three-dimensional world. Then all of a sudden, a seemingly messy dots started to line up, and you started to see the chart on the graph, right? So yeah, but again, it definitely on the rise, but as an industry, like again, we're working to defend that.
And then maybe this one, Bingjie and Hui, feel free to chime in as well. Do you see most of first-party abuse being organized crime? Hui, I think you alluded to how they've got these rings where people are being taught. Or do you also see a rise in just regular everyday people doing more of this abuse? At PayPal, we had the classic, hey, I never made this purchase. Like my kid ordered a bunch of online games on Apple Store. That sort of disputes come in. So curious, right? Like, are you seeing more organized retail crime or, sorry, just organized crime of any kind? Or are you seeing even just everyday folks retorting to this?
I would say probably both. The reason I say probably is because the difficulty of like addressing first party fraud due to the reason that we mentioned. Unlike third party fraud, there's not a safe here. You also mentioned this, Jay. Make it harder to detect as well as many other ways. So many, like, I don't think people have a clear view. Let me put it that way. Like indeed, what's the damage of first party fraud does to the business or even to the broader ecosystem, right? So on the everyday organized crime, for example, like we mentioned, with AI and technology, everything is so accessible. It's a lot easier, quote unquote, for fraudster to scale it versus in the past. It was like a manufacturing. Now they have the tools off the shelf, like return as a service or things like that at their fingertips, and also they can organize a full scheme. It might not be a purely first-party fraud, but it could be embedded. There are other victims with third-party fraud to defraud money from the good people. In terms of day-to-day, I would say with the social media, with the tools, everything, it's just quote unquote so attractive to even to a normal people. And then maybe it's indeed, or it's just something they were trapped, for example, scammed. It's another big topic we won't touch in depth today, I guess. But if they're just scam, all they care about is I want to get my money back. So then there's this technique whatsoever on social media, whatsoever he or she can easily like get. And then it's very tempting for even the everyday person to just go for it because all they want, I'm still victim, I just want to get my money back, then they can meet this first party fraud. So one thing I do want to add on top of what Hui shares earlier, I'm glad you mentioned about the everyday like people life. A lot of people feel like, oh, this is abuse, it's a friendly fraud, it's not really fraud. I really want to clarify, it is still fraud. It's not like moral or whatsoever value stuff. It is still fraud. Not something supposed to happen. It's really going to damaging the entire ecosystem and quote unquote being unfair to people who behave as what they're supposed to be doing.
on that note, right, obviously in financial services, in the payments world, stakes can be really high, losses can be really high. But speaking about it from a retail lens, especially to your point, Bingjie, like I think first party fraud is often both mislabeled, misunderstood, underrepresented, and not paid enough attention to because people think of it as policy abuse. But I really appreciated your point that it is still fraud. I've also seen second party fraud, third party fraud, credit fraud issues in general have been really the focus of the industry for years. And so as that front door gets shut more and more, fraudsters are going to try and find other ways to enter the ecosystem. And sort of this is the next gateway. We're starting to see that trend.
I think the reason we are seeing also like opportunists, like almost a one-off abuse going on, was because AI kind of democratized access to a lot of knowledge. I think today the consumers understand, say, network policy, merchants refund policy, whatever, a lot better than before. And now all these tools are helping them maneuver through this actually quite complicated system, and that kind of make the bar lower. So that's just all why like opportunities on the rise.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Love to hear, right, like without taking any names or mentioning past employers, what's the most interesting or creative kind of first party abuse either of you have come
Or
across?
most memorable, right? The one that you had the most fun chasing down.
Because I've had some certain ones where I look at it and I'll be like, okay, that was very creative. But would love to hear.
Maybe you can start actually to get our minds going.
So this one is, I mean, this is more closer to what we do in retail. And this one is a very interesting case of what people call SKU swapping. We see this more in expensive goods, jewelry, these kind of segments, where essentially somebody buys like, say, like a 18 karat gold chain, bracelet, whatnot. Then 4 months later, they buy the exact same item. Then they say, hey, I'm going to return this. And then they'll return the item that they purchased 4 months prior, right? And so every 4 months, they keep doing this. And so essentially you have upgraded to a new bracelet while paying just once perpetually.
That's quite interesting. Thanks for sharing, Jay. I can share some. There was once I was managing resolution protection for a short time period at PayPal. And back in then, PayPal and eBay was still the same company. So we were looking at, it was not called first party fraud yet. People call it like dispute abuse. So usually throughout your like lifetime, how many would you file? Probably not that many, right? Then, but if you take closer into the data, we see, oh, we got like very frequent visitors, I would call, showing up in our claims place. Then we take a closer look, we find some of the top folks on that list, they keep buying iPhone and then keep reporting item not delivered or it's broken. And then how many iPhones can you buy? I mean, that would be something, but they were definitely abusing the system to use those iPhones for free or even the upgraded free. The other one was really, I found it very funny because I wasn't able to piece it together, but I did get someone on my team that really expert on this was able to piece together. Someone keep buying on eBay, but keep saying it's not working, item not received. Then we look at his entire purchase story. This person pretty much get a free tractor. So he buy pieces and eventually those people, I wasn't able to tell what this for, what that for. Of course, back in then, eBay had an operation in Salt Lake City. So someone on my team, like really expert in this, he was like, "Oh my God, this guy's built a tractor." So that was quite amazing. But I think out of PayPal, eBay's pocket, or probably the merchant's pockets as well, and that was very blatant abuse of the policy, in my opinion, definitely.
It's so important, right, to put breadcrumbs together to understand the bigger story, and having that insight can be very, very powerful.
These are all like great stories. Maybe let me offer a slightly different. We call it like a blue story. Again, it means what would be a good story behind a seemingly bad behavior. So I have a story to share, very similar to giants. Differences are two. One is instead of expensive jewelry, is actually a new robot. Two is instead of every few months, we saw this person basically every week purchase something, returning it, purchase something, a different type, and return it, right? So of course, again, it fits into a typical abuse story.
Yes,
We usually have our system would detect it and try to stop it. And then later on, we found out is actually this person is basically an early adopter of new technology. He just likes to test. He wanted to find the right robber he really wanted, right? So that's why he was doing it. Of course, he didn't do it indefinitely, right? He did it quite a few times. So this is, again, one of the we call blue story. Like, again, a legit story. It looks very statistically weird, very bad, but it's actually a legit story. So I think knowledge like this got feedback into, again, an AI system so that later on our system knows to let them go, right? So again, it's the other side of the coin.
such a great sort of dual dichotomy of story. I like so many things about it. One, I think it's great that you've seen many firsts, right? When first party fraud, friendly fraud first started to get talked about, almost you were there and witnessing it. Like, your story is incredible as well, because this is exactly sort of that flip side, right? Like, how you can get caught in false positives, you can hurt your business if you're not really mindful about it, and you can sort of very quickly start to deter really good customers.
Yeah. Just on, as you guys were um, talking through these anecdotes, a question that occurred to me, right? Like, in your opinion, why is first party abuse so much more harder to detect than third party? And just as a quick follow up, if there was like one main secret sauce, if you will, for lack of a better word, that you think makes a difference, where you say, okay, this is a very clear tell that maybe it's not like a slam dunk, but this is a very clear tell that something is wrong, especially when it comes to trying to detect first party. Would love to hear if you've got any thoughts about this. Either of you, whoever wants to go first.
I can start. Hui, feel free to pile on. There are definitely lot of things about first-party fraud make it very special. I wouldn't say harder to detect, but each of the fraud schemes are very different. They have their own difficulty, and also I think both RC and Hui touch upon it. AI actually take it to the next level, right? So even third-party fraud is in a different level for us to detect and prevent and everything. But coming back to first-party fraud, I think there are a couple things. I think I find it very special, or slash you will say is harder to attack. And third-party fraud, over the years, we have developed a lot of things to be able to authenticate and validate. Because the specialty of first-party fraud, there's no sieve here. They use their own identity and everything. They can easily pass a lot of the authentication tools, identity check, like easily pass that. So whatever we built, like tailored to third party, doesn't really work here. So that's definitely something make it very hard. Second point, I would like to say, in the fraud space, supervised learning is still very powerful. You learn what happened in the past, you predict what's going to happen in the future. But given the nature of first-party fraud, finding that clear labeling to train your models and whatsoever actually is very hard. That's also make it not so easy to build a very powerful model, because your model does not have all the stories or a clear story in the first party fraud to train on. That's also why when you ask me the first question, how big is the problem? I would say probably a lot of institutions do not know because they don't have a clear labeling versus what you really see in the third-party fraud, right? Those probably the major ones. Like any other things in the fraud space, she said that's exactly the beauty of this space. It's fascinating, it's fast-changing, it's evolving all the time. I don't think we have a secret sauce yet. But one thing I want to call out, like also to Hui's point, people feel like it's like big data, large model, like AI, whatsoever, all those fancy words. But at the end of the day, it boils down what a really a legit people would do versus what a party fraudster would do. So I would say it boils down to pattern recognition as well as like consistency. If you ask me what is the secret sauce, I would say probably overwhelmingly inconsistency is definitely some like signal that I'll be focusing on, but it's still quite a problem for a lot of people in the industry to crack yet.
Very insightful.
So I would say, I think we touch upon that first party abuse much harder than third party fraud detection. Is because again, identity is good, it's clean. If you look at one transaction, it's actually perfectly fine. Like again, even there is one bad guy decides to just do this one bad thing for his or her entire life, I think if I'm the merchant, I will just take it if it's only once, right? So it's much difficult. We cannot just look at one person or one transaction. You have to have a context. You have to have the history. You have to look at, again, a network effect, right? In the old days, these are the technology hurdles because the compute system still not powerful enough to search so much history or such a big network. But nowadays, certainly a lot of compute barrier is gone. So again, technology is ready to tackle such a problem. So I would say, if I look at the abuse, right? So there are two things, signals that I will be focusing on. Number one is I think these abusers, I would be looking for their repetitive behavior to almost try to optimize their activity to abuse the policy system. Again, if it's one-off, really it's very hard. But we'll be looking for things they do that will scale themselves up, make it repeatable for them or their group of people. So this would be the signal I'm looking for again, because that's what really eats into business margin. The second thing is, again, for this to be effective, you have to look at the history, look at the peer group, look at the network, because again, one single account or a few doesn't give you enough signal along that line. So these are the two things I'll be focusing on. But again, it's certainly, like Bingjie said, there are a lot of other challenges like labeling, things like that. Make it a lot difficult, but again, it's exciting for companies like Bingjie to tackle and solve.
Yep. So actually on that note, and it's a great way to segue into the next part of our conversation, but just a point, I think, to bring what Bingjie, you said a little bit more to the forefront, right? Like the way we see it, this isn't a sort of machine learning, build the best model you can sort of solution to address this problem. And Hui, I think you said this a little bit as well. It's very much about understanding for a specific business, what does normal look like? And another really important factor around detection that we've learned, you have to understand the context and the intent of the person shopping, not just in the current interaction, but what their intent might be off platform, right? Like what do they do off platform that might indicate that the current behavior is not normal? So how do you balance the value of machine learning and AI with just understanding the business and learning about people and behaviors becomes super important. And so on that note, maybe Hui, I'll start with you on this question. Look, AI and machine learning has gone through probably the most massive evolution in our own history over the last sort of 2.5, 3 decades in the fraud space. It's always been a thing in fraud, right? Fraud as a domain has been a very early adopter of machine learning in general, but there is so much conversation and talk about Gen AI and LLMs and what is the true definition of AI. Would love for you to demystify the value of machine learning versus Gen AI and LLMs, specifically in fraud detection, right? And demystify for us what is real and what is a ton of marketing.
So, like you said, actually, machine learning it has always been there for fraud detection. So, what is machine learning? It's trying to learn a distribution to a way to predict the outcome. In the fraud detection, this is fraud or not fraud is a 0 and 1. But when it comes to generative AI, the good thing is it basically learn the distribution and then use it to generate new content, and that's what make it powerful, right? And then the large language model introduces this language domain and you can use to interpret your model and do a lot of other things. So these are three technologies that are really interdependent and then really work together to deliver, again, good things, right? So for example, in fraud detection, we certainly still use machine learning to do prediction, but a large language model comes in, enable us to use, we call it the multimodal, right? Now, again, as you mentioned, right? Online information, offline information, text, video, voice, image, like all these things can very efficiently come together through LLM and then being utilized by machine learning models. So this is one way in fraud detection how we use this new technology. And then Bingjie mentioned labeling is always a very difficult task in fraud detection, especially in abuse. It's very hard to say, is this real abuse or not? And then that's where actually a large language model can come in. Okay, we can actually train a large language model that can help a human being or make human effort a lot more efficient in labeling your data, which is again a must-have for fraud detection. And then also some large language model technology can help explain your model. Like today's large machine learning model becomes almost impossible, unlike your credit score. Like it's kind of easy to tell you why I'm declining you, but a machine learning model with thousands or even more features, it becomes like almost impossible. But again, all these new algorithms help us to explain, and large language model help us to say it in a way very easy for consumer to understand. So this is how, again, examples how fraud detection are utilizing all this new technology. Another thing I want to call out is Afi, Bingjie, you both know, right? When we build this fraud detection system, we went from 0 to 20, 20 to 4. It took us a long time, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 years to get to where we were. I think today's generative algorithm, language model, it can help us jump from 0 to 80 like very, very quickly. So that's all this efficiency gain. Of course, you will say the last mile, the last 80 to 100, probably will still take a lot of time and efforts, but still, like being able to jumpstart very fast is a huge advantage for the whole human being to be able to benefit from this technology. But all in all, I said, if you hear someone saying generative AI or LLM will solve fraud detection problem, that's marketing. That's not math.
And I will say, like, that last mile, and this is maybe like my opinion here, that last mile, especially when it comes to solving business problems, because, you know, fraud detection is not an algorithmic problem, right? There's a huge part of it, but it is a business problem at the end of the day. That last mile still requires a lot of human intelligence, human insight, understanding of the business, understanding of what you're looking to optimize to really get the whole way. And we're a long way away from getting rid of the intelligent human in the mix when it comes to fraud detection in particular. Bingjie, anything that you would like to add?
I agree with both of you. Maybe two quick things I would like to add. One, I want to pile on about the human, like how human play a role over here. Like I think both you and Hui touch upon. At the end of the day, be it machine learning, like whatsoever, it's still about like human understand the story. So you both know actually it's not about data in, data out. At the end of the day, it has to be a combination of a data-driven approach plus a story-based. What's the fraud story? What's a good story? What's a blue story that way? Things needs to making sense. So that definitely requires you a lot of human expertise, domain expertise, as well as thinking from the customer's shoes, what a regular customer will be doing. I really want to highlight that's still very important. The other piece I want to add, I think Gen AI, LM, whatsoever, they are like electricity. They are tools. This can be used by us, by like fighters. It can also be used by the fraudsters. I already see in the space, for example, you require face recognition. No problem. Gen AI is going to generate whatever you require from me. I'm going to pass you authenticate. Or like fraud as a service. You don't need to be an expert to be a fraudster. There's a package in the market or like $10. You can buy it very cheaply. So it's a double-edged sword. It's electricity. So it still requires a lot of governance, how people use AI, and also requires a lot, like what we mentioned, what we call responsible AI to get into it, to be the electricity benefit the broader ecosystem, but not something actually power up the fraudsters to damage the ecosystem.
Yep. Very, very,
Yeah. Just sort of going back, sorry, this is just one of my pet peeve conversations that I keep having with data scientists all the time. From what both of you are telling me, it sounds like GenAI, LLMs, they help with augmenting existing modeling that you do, right? Like everything's from labeling, parsing, everything that enables you to go really quick to end stage modeling. But we are not in a place where they can replace today's predictive models. So one question, like very super layman terms, right? Like some people say, hey, all these old machine learning models that have always existed, this can be replaced by LLMs. And my sort of response to that always is, well, maybe it'll get 40-60% of it right, but the parts that it gets wrong so bad that you end up making more work for yourself than less. I don't know, like, is that your opinion? Do you guys have a strong thought about it? Because in my opinion, I feel like machine learning models cannot be replaced just yet, right? Like you can have LLM and AI models sort of helping augment or just get to very good speeds of production, but I don't think they replace traditional models just yet.
Yeah, I'm with you, right? So again, but by the way, this is industry-wide, and many people are asking these questions. In the modeling world, we always think there's no silver bullet, right? There's no one algorithm that always wins, and there's no one approach that always wins. You always want to have almost like a voting committee or whatever, have all these technology do what they are best at doing, and then again, we can eventually vote and find a winner. And then chances are that you will find different winners from at different time. This LLM competition. Like every once in a while, the new winner came up. So again, I think industry as we evolve, we will continue to find new things and continue to find answers to this great question. I will just quote our empirical experience. Like again, we've been testing all these generative algorithms. We've been testing all these large language model technologies in various processes in this flow end to end. Like Arthur said, it's not just a model, right? And there's rules, there's strategy, there's operation. How do we review? And then there is, of course, refund, dispute, all these things. Efficiency domain. Like I said, in the modeling world, we can go from 0 to 80 when a brand new problem presents itself. We go from 0 to 80 really quick. We don't need to take the 10 years from fraud detection for the three of us to build. Like again, very quickly. So that's efficiency. Back office operation, I think can speak a lot to it, right? So we can leverage various GenAI LLM technology to make our human being a lot more efficient. Honestly, I have not personally, I have not seen a model with even generative algorithm or with new technology beating our classic machine learning model. But of course, the new model is a lot simpler. Our classic model was built over 15 years. It's layers on top of it. It's very complex, like, to be honest. But still, like again, purely from the performance point of view, I have not seen like this other one, like again, beating the traditional one with a big margin. But again, we're still evolving, we're still exploring. Maybe one day it will happen, but I have not seen it myself.
And I think sadly, biggest problem everyone needs to solve before they can talk about machine learning versus Gen AI models will come down to who has cleaner, better data. I think we will all agree on that point. So just to kind of maybe wrap this amazing conversation up, although I feel like we can talk for another few hours about many of these things. Question for each of you. Share what you are most excited about solving as a challenge that AI is uniquely bringing to the industry, and something you're really excited about as an opportunity when it comes to fraud fighting. Bingjie, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, also I want to circle back to what JN mentioned earlier. It's very much related to just shared route. I would say the fraud space is a very pragmatic space. I mean, be it LM, machine learning, Gen AI, or even the old logistic regression model, I don't really care. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, I don't care how fancy it is. I think at the end of the day, it boils down. I keep the bad actors out of the platform. I don't do this by sacrificing customer experience or member trust. all the business grows, and I have to do this in a very efficient way. At the end of the day, whichever AI tools or whatsoever is going to help me solve those problems, that'll be my star performer. So that'll be something I'll continue to drive in the coming year. And by accomplishing those, I'll still coming back to my original mission of safeguard ecosystem and customer drive the sustainable growth in a very economic and scalable way. That'll be something I'll like putting on my 2026 wish list as well as I'll be striving for.
Yeah. What got me excited is, I think I alluded to earlier, is AI as a technology will continue to help democratize access to knowledge. Dreaming of, let's say, something like a fraud GPT or maybe a dispute GPT or a return GPT, with these our good customers, really lower the bar for them to understand all these like a very complicated policy processes. So as a way, like we can educate the good customers to show good behaviors, to follow good practice. Then of course it will make people like us, like our job, also easier, right? But again, then the general consumer, they can really benefit from this word to, in a sense, like again, we still believe people are basically good, and then we will lower the bar and then level the playing ground that everybody can play on the same ground.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you both. This was an amazing conversation. I feel like we need a follow-up conversation about Gentech and what each of you think it's going to do to the fraud world and especially the disputes ecosystem and chargebacks. But I will save that for another conversation. Thank you again for taking time out. I will end on this note. It is probably the thing that I miss most is working with the two of you and talking about these things every day, not just in this context. So hopefully we will have that opportunity again soon. So thank you, ladies.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank
Bye.
you.